Welcome to the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy podcast. We are here every week working at simplifying things in our lives one day at a time, one simple step at a time. This way of simplifying things, this idea of working at eliminating the junk in our lives, it doesn't necessarily make things easier, but it definitely makes them better. I'm your host, Michelle Visser, and I am so glad you're here today. Guys, before we go any further, though, I want you to stop. Trust me, just pause what you're doing and go to solelyrested.com/flower. SOULY rested.com/FLOUR. Really do it. I'll be here. I'll be waiting when you get back. But the reason I want you to go there is there is a new gray mill available on the market that has blown me away. It is available at a price point that you will find nowhere else, and it makes the finest, most amazing fresh flour. Fresh flour contains 40 out of the 44 essential nutrients that your body needs. Using fresh flour will up the game in your kitchen, and it even can help you lose weight because it makes you feel more full. It avoids the blood sugar spikes, and it even helps with inflammation. There's so many reasons, guys, to switch over your flour to fresh flour that you have ground yourself. And with this new mill, everybody can do this. I'm not kidding. Go check it out. I even have an exclusive code for you waiting. Solely Rested, SOULY rested.com/flour, FLOUR. Solelyrested.com/flour. So today we are talking about three things that you should consider, three things you should keep in mind to not get tripped up about real food. If you're trying to improve the quality of the food in your kitchen, in your pantry, on your family table, there's these three things that I'd like you to think about. Um, this week, I've actually been thinking about these three things because of last week's episode. If you didn't catch last week's episode with Daryl Bosshart, you definitely want to go back after this episode and listen to that one. It was really great talking to Daryl. It's twice he's been on the show now. Both episodes are great. And I was sharing on Instagram about last week's episode and some things that I learned from the episode and from talking with Daryl. And these three ideas kept coming up again and again with questions people had for me and different things people were commenting. Um, so I thought, I actually have a couple of episodes that have come out of that, honestly. This one today and next week's. Next week, we're going to talk very specifically about one of those three myths that Daryl helped us bust through last episode. And I'm going to go in a little bit deeper and talk in depth just about that one myth and how it relates to our real food. So I think you'll really like that one too. But for now, I have these three things today. I'm trying to get myself focused because it just started downpouring outside and I was getting ready to record and realized I had a few farm things I had to do, some chores before it got dark. By the way, oh my goodness, this time change, guys, isn't it does it kill you the way it kills me? Like it takes me at least a week, probably longer, to feel like I have somewhat recovered. And I hate it that at 5 o'clock it's pitch dark outside. And I keep telling myself there's positive things to it. And, I'm going to get used to it and all that. But the fact is, I know the seasonal depression is going to be something I need to work on very soon, although it hasn't started yet. So I'm very thankful for that. And I wonder, a few things that I have been doing over the years, I think are really, really helping with that. If you live in an area where you get less sunlight than other areas of the country, you struggle a little bit with the vitamin D and all of that, you know what I'm talking about when I mention seasonal depression. In fact, just today at lunch, a friend was asking me about it and asking me if I had any suggestions for it because she knows about this podcast and everything. She said, have you talked about that on the podcast? Is there anything you do to combat it? And I shared a couple things with her. I thought, that actually would be a great episode. So maybe we'll do that in an upcoming episode too. Just break down a few things I've learned about that and a few things that have been helping me. But anyway, so I sat down to record and the weather turned weird looking, like, the sky just looks a little weird, and I knew I had to get out and do the farm stuff, and I thought, with the time change, I better go do that now, or I'm gonna be doing it in the pitch dark. So, I got the pigs fed, their water trough full. It was totally empty, poor guys. And one particular chicken was giving me the worst trouble. All the rest were in and ready to get closed in for the night. We have free ranging chickens. And every night, all I do is I go down in the morning and open it, give them fresh food, fresh water. And then in the evening, I go down and close it. But every once in a while, there's one or two that give me trouble and just are fooling around. She doesn't want to go in. And usually I'll just go back down later once she's settled in. But I knew I wanted to record this and it would be dark when I was done. And then I'm like, I'm in the coop. I don't know why I'm telling you guys this. I'm sorry. I sometimes just like to talk. I feel like we're sitting down and having a talk sometimes. Um, I'm in the coop and I'm like, what's that sound? It was the weirdest sound. I couldn't figure out. It was the rumbling of the rain that was like in the distance and coming my way. So when I realized it, I hightailed it out of the coop and I got back to almost halfway back to the house before I got sopping wet with the rain that was pouring out of the clouds suddenly. But anyway, so all of that, and I'm feeling a little frazzled, but I need to sit down and focus and have a chat with you because I then need to make sure that dinner is ready. Everybody's going to be hungry before I get this done. So the three things that have been coming up a lot this week in my chats with you guys on Instagram and other places. First one, don't be fooled by a name. And it reminded me of the Romeo and Juliet quote, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." And it's true, guys. The people in marketing are so wise about the names they choose for something, and they put a lot of money and effort into what are we going to call this product. And it often works for them. They have a special name on it, and everybody thinks, well, this is a good food. This is real food. This is a good ingredient because of the name. But don't be fooled. Specifically, for this week with salt, it was people asking me, well, if it says sea salt, I use a sea salt. I'm sure that's fine, right? And I'm like, no, guys, actually, it's not fine, unfortunately, because anything, it depends on what nation or what country you live in. I believe it's Japan and China of all places. It seems kind of odd to me. Let me look my notes here. No, I'm not right. Canada and Japan. That makes sense. They have strict regulations over what can be called sea salt, but I'm pretty sure that might be the only countries that have a regulation on those words. So, I mean, essentially, if you think about it, all salt comes from the sea, even the salt that's been mined underground. It's there because there was water in that reservoir underground at some time that has evaporated, somehow moved through the ground elsewhere. I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but there was water there at one time, which left salt deposits, right? And I mean, probably a lot of it has to do, honestly, with the worldwide flood, I would imagine. But so all salt at some time was in the sea. And I guess that's why they really don't regulate it, if you think about it. Because I mean, yeah, it's true. It was in the ocean water at some point. But um, and marketers know it sounds good. Oh, sea salt, and you're willing to spend more. And that's what it all comes down to, right? If they can put a name on it that makes you spend more, they are golden. So a lot of salt companies like to put those words, and they're allowed to, but it really means absolutely nothing. And it is not uncommon to find a salt that says sea salt on the label, and it's actually a highly refined salt. And anytime that you can avoid refined options, you want to. So that's what you really want to check, not if it has the words sea salt. You want to check if it is refined. Another example of this is meat. I think maybe I did an episode quite a while ago about this. I'm sure I did. Should have looked that up. I will hopefully remember. I'll put a link in the show notes to the episode all about this topic, that meat in your grocery store will say product of the US. And often people think, oh, great. I know the animal was raised here in the country somewhere. That's got to be better than something shipped in. I'm going to buy this, and they'll probably pay more for it. But unfortunately, that term, those that phrase can be on meat as long as it was somehow touched in the US, whether it be sliced or packaged or repackaged. So, very seldom whole carcasses come across the oceans and are unloaded and then cut up and called product of the US. So, never believe those words on your meat. You really want to, if you're able to, find the actual source, not just see those words and go for it. So, that's the first point. Don't be fooled by the name. Second of all, it's kind of the same idea, but don't look for the word natural and say, okay, this is good. Because unfortunately, the word natural means absolutely nothing. And again, it is not regulated in any way. Instead of looking for that buzzword, you want to see how close this product, this ingredient, or this food, how close it exists, or how close it is currently as you're purchasing it to how it existed in nature. And so often things will give you all the vibes that they're, from nature, and they're not at all. And they've been altered 44 times and 18 different chemicals added before they actually get to your kitchen table. So the word natural means nothing, unfortunately. If, like, let's think about teas. If you're buying some of those tea bags at the grocery store and they have some wonderful flavors and some beautiful boxes, and you're going, oh, this sounds great. And you know that tea is plants, duh. Like, so it's got to be a good, it's got to be something good to drink. And it sounds so delicious. And then you taste it and you're like, oh my word, this is amazing. And you're thinking it's somewhat healthy for you. But unfortunately, if it is not a strictly organic tea that is regulated as organic, then they can call it whatever they want and they can say they have natural flavors, which means absolutely nothing. Usually, if you see the words natural flavors, you know it's bad and you should run away. Um, and you're, it's just so easy. I think with teas for me, especially, to assume it's okay. But they put all kinds of stuff in there to make the taste addicting and appealing and very sugary and totally refined, totally processed stuff. And instead, you really want to look for organic because then when you see the words natural flavor, that is actually regulated if it's an organic tea. And you want to look for things, if possible, that are actually flavored with real food instead of being flavored with artificial ingredients. So for teas, organic teas, often if it's a peach tea, guess what? It's flavored with dried peaches. Imagine that. Protein powders are a thing that people are very quick to assume are a good for you drink. It's a great thing. It's full of protein. We need more protein. But a lot of protein powders are completely not good ingredients. And even the sources of the protein, if it's not a well rounded variety of sources of protein, it's not useful to your body. And um, so many proteins powders have stuff in it to flavor it to make it sound really great to the consumer. But the stuff they use to flavor it is awful for you. On the other hand, the protein powder that I love, it's actually the only one I use. They use actual real food to flavor it. And they have a strawberry flavor. Guess what? It's flavored with actually dried strawberries. And they use cacao for, the chocolate one. But then they also add in adaptogens. That's another thing that's part of this. Don't just look for the word natural. Make sure if you can that you find an ingredient that's as close to its natural existence when you're buying it as it was when it was growing or whatever the case. Um, but also, if it's a multi-ingredient product you're buying, ideally, are there some adaptogens added in? Like the really best companies these days are doing that. They're adding in extra health bonuses for us by giving us herbs or roots or other parts of a plant or mushrooms that have been dried, turned into powder, and added in. And not only does it usually enhance the flavor, or it doesn't have any flavor at all, but it's adding to the nutritional value so greatly. So instead of eating the junk and the chemicals that they put in it to make food addictive and to make it taste super sugary, instead, if you're buying the good stuff, the right companies, um, you're getting that added health benefit of the adaptogens and the actual plants, the roots and herbs that they're adding in to up the value of, in this case, I'm thinking of protein powders. Um, so Just Ingredients is the one that I highly recommend. I'll leave a link in the show notes. And anytime that you want to go check them out, and like I said, they're my favorite protein powder in the world. Use my code Solely Rested, SOULYRESTED, and you get a percentage off every single order all the time. It's an ongoing code. And they're just, I can't tell you enough about this company, the products. Maybe I should actually just do an episode about the protein powders because they're that good and they're like kind of life changing for me. Um, but another way that I add adaptogens is my hot chocolate. Have I done an episode on my hot chocolate? You know what? We'll get to that. We'll get to one. It's also kind of life changing for me, but I add adaptogens in to my mix. And you can actually buy products like that from Just Ingredients. They have an amazing hot chocolate recipe that they add the adaptogens in to increase the value of the product. So, all of this to say, don't be fooled by the word natural. Instead, see how close to nature is the product that you're buying. And when it comes to salt, with Redmond, there's two things about it. First of all, there's nothing added in, they are completely unrefined. And it's a single traceable source where this salt comes from. One source, that's it. And yeah, the way to think about this, when the Morton salt that I grew up seeing, with the little girl with her umbrella, their logo that's so iconic, their saying was, "When it rains, it pours." Do you know where that came from? It's actually very interesting because when there's humidity in the air, which is typically when it's raining, salt in its natural state, depending on where you live in the country, will tend to clump. And Morton's was one of the first big companies to come up with a way to fix this problem because it's such a horrible thing if your salt clumps, like the world ends, right? So they added in all kinds of chemical additives to keep that from happening. So their slogan became, "When it rains, it pours," meaning your salt is still going to pour. You're not going to have clumps. And when they first came out with that, it meant a whole lot to the housewives of the time because they knew what that meant. They knew that sometimes, especially in the summer, depending on where they lived and how humid it was, their salt shakers didn't work and they couldn't get the salt out. And they got excited that, oh, this is a magical new salt. But here's the thing, to be able to make it always able to pour when it's humid, they added in chemicals, all kinds of additives. Redmond doesn't do that. Nothing is added in. But the beauty is they also don't take anything away. So, did you know that when you buy a salt like Morton salt or any table salt, they have taken out all of the nutrients that would be in that salt, every single mineral that would naturally occur in that salt, they have removed. You know why? Bottom line, money, because they can sell each one of those components to all different companies and have a much higher profit margin and then just give us literally the salt, just the sodium, just the stuff that's going to make our french fries taste good. And they took all those good for us stuff out of it and sold it all to the highest bidder. So Redmond doesn't do that. They literally take the salt that they have mined out of the ground in Utah and they provide it to you in that state. So they don't add anything and they don't take anything away. There are things you can do though, because salt naturally does clump when there's moisture. The most easiest thing is to add a few kernels. Is kernel the right word? I don't think that's the right word. Of rice. What do you want to call it? I don't know. The word's eluding me. Pieces of rice into your salt shaker, and the rice will absorb the moisture that's in the air, and the salt will not clump. I want to pause right here with a question for you. We talk a lot here on the show about how important simple little things can be and how one simple change can really make a huge impact over time. But do we think about the some of the most basic, simplest things in our kitchen? Do we think about the ingredient that we probably use the most? And do we make sure that we're choosing the best? I'm talking about salt. And I know when you go to the store, there are a lot of choices in front of you. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I eliminated every other choice. There is only one choice for me, and that is Redmond real salt. And actually, it's a fascinating topic that if you want to go to episode 142, we get into a whole lot of detail about the myths about salt and why real salt is important. But let me just tell you right now, please go to soulyrested, SOULY rested.com/salt, because I want to share with you more details about this company and an amazing discount code that you can use anytime, all the time. And I've listed my 9 all-time favorite products that I always have in my kitchen from Redmond Real Salt. Believe it or not, they have a lot more than just salt, guys. Go check out these 9 products. Go to soulyrested.com/salt and make sure you enjoy that discount code as well. If you are ready for the holidays, they are quickly approaching, and it's time to think about if you can be a little more intentional this holiday season. I know it's my goal to be more intentional than I typically am, hoping that the holidays don't just fly by without me really giving good thought to some things that are important to me, specifically gift giving. I don't want to give frivolous things that just provide something for the recipient to open. I want to give intentional gifts, ones that are promoting health and wellness, ones that are encouraging fulfilling hobbies and activities, ones that are getting the family together, and ones that are, of course, focused on healthy, real food. So, if you'd like to see what I'm giving as gifts this year, I would love to share the guide with you. Go to Souly Rested, SOULY rested.com/holiday. And I'm going to share with you some of my unusual, but I think gifts that will be very appreciated this year. Please go check it out, soulyrested.com/holiday. Also, you know what? If you get a few clumps, you can take a knife and hit it with the knife and they come apart. It's really not the hugest deal. I'd much rather do that than have chemicals added to my salt that I don't need. So, first one is don't be fooled by a name. Second tip is consider how close what you're eating is to how it existed in nature. And the third thing to think about with your real food ingredients is, do you have options? Usually, when it's an all natural thing, you have options. I'll explain what I mean in a second. And know that you have options and know that you can choose the right form of that real food to fit your needs, your interests, what it is you want at that moment. For instance, maple. You guys know maple is something I love to talk about any old time. If you don't know that, I will explain. I'm a sugar maker. We have been making our own maple syrup here on our sugar bush for the past, this will be our 10th year that we have been topping trees. Or is it the 11th? It's the 10th. And I wrote a book about it back in 2019 called Sweet Maple. I actually have one right here. I send out autographed copies. You can order that on my website. You know what? I'll put it in the show notes if I remember. And I often am sending out autographed copies here from the farm. So I have one sitting right here to send out to someone tomorrow. And I'll just show those of you who are on YouTube. This is my book. And I'm really passionate about all natural complex sugars and I love maple. But the coolest thing about maple and other sugars as well, natural sugars, is it comes in different forms. Like, for instance, do you know dates? You could eat a date, you could eat date sugar, you could get the date sugar finer or coarser, and you can also get date syrup. So you have all these different forms, but it's all just 100% dates. Same thing with maple. You can get maple as your typical maple syrup. You can turn that into sugar. You get these wonderful, almost sprinkles, like chunks of maple. When you turn it into sugar, you will have the crystallized larger pieces that you can separate out, and I use them as sprinkles. You can make maple cream, and that's actually what I'm going to be talking about in a second. That is my favorite form of maple. Love it. It is so good to slather on a fresh piece of homemade bread, toasted, or on crackers and on a piece of chocolate. My favorite thing to do with maple cream is to dip a strawberry in the maple cream. Oh my word. Much better than chocolate covered strawberries. Um, and you could turn the maple into maple cotton candy. You could, what am I forgetting? You could drink maple sap, which is straight from the tree, or you could drink a more sugary version that's not yet maple syrup. Like there's so many ways you could enjoy maple. And here's what I'm going to get to. Here, this is what I've been leading up to, guys. I couldn't believe it when I saw on Instagram something the other day, and I have since realized it was a trend this fall, that someone was sharing a reel of how she makes her maple lattes. And she only makes them with maple cream because they're so decadently creamy. And I'm just watching this with an open mouth and thinking, oh my word. Because you see, maple cream is more complicated to make than maple syrup. You start with maple syrup and you have to do a few things to it, and it takes some time to get it into cream. So it's going to always cost more. I mean, always, because it takes more time. So it's a much more expensive variety of the sweetener than syrup is. And guess what? Syrup would mix into her latte like that. It's a liquid syrup. It would just like mix in beautifully. And guess what? They're both the same thing. So it would taste exactly the same. So, and apparently it was a trend that lots of people were doing this. And I assume what they were thinking was maple cream is creamy, like as in dairy creamer, and it made their drink more milky and frothy. No, it's maple, guys. It's the exact same thing. All of it's the same. All those things I just mentioned, from the sugar to the sprinkles to the cotton candy, all of it, it's just maple sap that has been processed in a different way, boiled longer, boiled at different temperatures, quickly blended, slowly blended. Oh, candies. There's all kinds of candies too that you could make. So please do not waste your money on the wrong option of your real food. You can get pepper finely ground, or in larger chunks, or in medium sized chunks of pepper, or you can actually, grow peppers and make pepper powder. You can dehydrate it. There's so many forms of pepper, right? Choose the right one, and don't waste your effort. Like for me, for mint, I grow my own mint, and I was making ice cream once, and I happened to have I was right by my cabinet with my herbs. I grabbed it and I put it in as I was mixing up what I was going to put in the ice cream machine. And Bill was standing there, and he looked over and he's like, "Why are you doing that?" I'm like, "What do you mean? I'm making mint ice cream." He's like, "Don't you have a ton of it growing right outside the door?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I think he wanted to like knock me upside the head, the look he gave me. And it was like a light bulb moment. I really hadn't thought about that with mint until then. And I'm like, oh, oh, you're right. Why on earth am I not using fresh? Because you see, it took me time to make that dried mint. And he knows, because all summer, end of the summer and fall long, he knows. He sees my dehydrators running. He sees me processing all my different foods that I've grown. It's not it's not that it's hard. I don't want to say it's hard, but it takes time, right? It takes effort. There's effort involved. So why, if I have the fresh version right there, would I grab the dried version? Save the dried version for January when I'm making ice cream or brownies, right? And use the fresh version now, because there's no effort involved. I just clip it off and put it in. Does that make sense? So with salt, where this comes in is how many different salt varieties there are. There are so many different options of coarseness, which I didn't even know until, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, that I finally somehow came across this idea that there's so many options of coarseness, but I still at that point didn't understand why. So if you're like I was, I thought, this would be a good thing to explain because it's useful to know. So let's go from largest size of crystals down to the finest. So let's start with the largest ones, and that would be the coarse salt. If you were following last episode, Daryl actually showed us some. If you're watching on YouTube, it's just a bigger chunk than any other salt you're going to buy. Well, that's not true. You know what? There is a bigger option. I don't know what they call it. It's actually like like the size of a small rock. It is a rock, but it's a chunk of salt. You can actually buy it that way from Redmond too. I believe I think it people that do intermittent fasting really like those. I'm not sure the why. Something about it helps them if they have a craving to overcome the craving, and they just pull out their big chunk, and I don't know, do they lick it, I think? I don't know. Redmond sells it and people buy it and there's a use for it. I just don't know that one. But the next one that I do know a use for is the one that they call coarse. And that is a larger granule that you're going to need a grinder for. You can't just add that to your food. It is too large of a piece to just put it on your food. But it's great to put in a grinder if you want to grind on demand your salt all the time. And it gives you a slightly more oomph of a flavor because it was just ground. Same thing with herbs. When I do dry my herbs, I will put them in jars as whole leaves, like my mint leaves. I don't crush them and then put them in the jar. The negative is it does take up more space, like slightly more space. But to me, I love it because when I go to crush it, like the oregano, and I'm putting it in my pasta sauce, the smell is amazing. It genuinely makes me happy. Like it sets off some dopamine receptors, I think, to smell that fresh oregano. And I think it gives food more flavor to have just been freshly turned from the leaf. I'll just rub it in my hands and, it turns into the little tiny pieces that go in my food. I just think it gives it more flavor and it just is more fun. So, same kind of idea. If you want your fresh salt in your grinder, you want to buy the coarse size. The next one down is called, and this is the one that always confused me the most, it's called kosher salt. I always assumed it had been blessed by a rabbi. Like that's all. I had no idea it meant anything other than that. But it does. Because kosher salt is actually a smaller coarseness than the one I just mentioned, but larger than your typical salt. Like if you bought table salt, it's much larger than that. It's in between. And it's perfect for using to prepare your meats. It pulls the moisture out of the meat in a way that makes it like just so tender, so good. And if because I'm not sure about this. I don't know Jewish customs and Jewish food, but I think that it's related. I think that act of pulling the moisture out made some things appropriate for Jewish custom, possibly is how it got the name. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. Maybe I just dreamed that one night and made it up. but but I can tell you that that is what kosher refers to. It simply refers to the size of the granules. And I love the kosher salt that I get from Redmond. I get a 10-pound bag at a time every time when I get it. And I will use it for things like my everything bagel seasoning. I use that in so many ways on so many things. Instead of salt, I'll use my everything bagel seasoning. And you need the coarser salt, or the salt would always just fall to the bottom, but the coarser kosher size will stay mixed into your blend. I will also use it like for homemade pretzels when they're warm and out of the oven, the big oven baked pretzels. I'll put the kosher salt on those because you want that big burst of flavor when you're taking a bite of your pretzel. I will make garlic pepper, and I will actually also get like a medium-sized peppercorn. I don't know what they're called. There's like actually numbers. Did you know that for peppercorns, there's numbers that tell you how big they are? So I have a note somewhere that so when I go to order, I know what size I need, but I get a certain size peppercorn and the kosher salt and a few other things, and that makes my garlic pepper seasoning, and I'll put it into a grinder and grind it whenever I'm using it. But you also can just buy the garlic pepper from Redmond, and that is amazing. Might be my favorite seasoning actually. Um, homemade crackers and homemade Cheez-Its, I will top with the kosher salt because it's just so much nicer than just regular table salt because you really do get that burst and that pop of salt as you eat your cracker. And I'll use it to clean my cast iron pans because you want that bigger size of coarseness to get the cast iron nice and clean. And I mean, whenever you want that extra pop of salt, basically, it's a great salt to use. And then the next one down is called fine. That's what Redmond calls it. And that's your typical standard thing of any salt that you would buy at the grocery store, the table salt size. It's just an average size of crystal. Um, And it's the most common one. It's the one you use for everyday use. So when I buy that, did you catch how big my bag is of kosher? Did you catch? I got a 10-pound bag when I get that. When I buy the fine salt, the everyday one that I use the most, I buy a 25-pound bag because the price per unit is so much better. And it's so easy to store. It never goes bad. And I can never grow it myself. So why not? So when I buy it, I buy a lot of it. And then the next one down, the last one in the list is, I think they call it powder. You can also, they also sell popcorn salt. And the two different products are actually the same thing, but they wanted the consumer to know that this is a powdery salt, but it also can be a popcorn salt. They didn't want to be confusing. So they literally sell the same thing with two names, which I think is kind of nice of them. But it's really extra fine. So you want to, if you're using that on your food, like in your baking or whatever, you need to use it really sparingly because it's so fine and it will make your food super salty if you put an equal amount of the fine salt as you would the regular salt. But it's great for popcorn salt. I'm making air popped popcorn, I don't know, 3, 4 times a week probably. It's my favorite snack. And I will always use the popcorn salt because it sticks really well to the popcorn. It just kind of holds on. You need much less oil because the salt is so fine. So it's good stuff. Okay, so that's it. That's the three things that kept coming up in my conversations with you folks over on Instagram. And I just kind of wanted to sit down and put it all in one place. And I thought it would be nice to do an episode just summing up those three themes that kept coming up this week. So don't be fooled by the name, guys. Don't look for a fancy name. Don't let the marketers fool you. And don't let the word natural actually mean anything to you. Instead, look and see if your real food or your real food ingredients are close to or eat the same as you would find them in nature. And finally, choose the right option. That's a great thing about real food and all natural food. Often you have a lot of options, more so than you would with the junk processed stuff. So, let me rephrase that. That sounded like processed stuff, guys. There are so many options, right? And they fill it with so many different chemicals. And you have, if you're going to buy Doritos, you have what, 15 choices of flavors because they have all these chemicals they can put in there to give you all these different options of flavors. So let me backtrack and rephrase what I said. If you have a single ingredient, real food, often you have options of how you can source it, the size it can be, how you choose to store it, and how you choose to use it. So I know you're spending more time, more effort, and more money if you're going the good, wholesome, whole food route. So stop and think about those choices and choose the best ones, the ones that are going to be the most cost effective and the ones that you kind of get the more bang for your buck and you know how to use those different choices. So salt's just one example that I really broke down for you, but I think you get the idea. And for heaven's sakes, whatever you do this week, do not waste your amazing maple cream in a latte. I love maple lattes, but use your syrup, guys. So that's it for today. I'm so glad that you joined me, and I hope you have a great week. Next week, we're going to be talking about that final thing that kept coming up this week. So join me for that. We're going to be talking about, it's actually a kind of a, I don't know, a huge trend and thing right now on social media, at least in my world of social media. I'll just tell you what I'm going to be talking about. People are talking about heavy metals in our foods, and real food is getting a really bad rap. And it's really been irritating me. And because I was talking about it in relation to salt on Instagram this week, I was shocked at how many folks reached out to me with concerns about X, Y, or Z that are all really good food choices. And they're telling me, but I heard that it has heavy metals. So I need to talk to you guys about this. We need to break it down and we need to determine once and for all, do we need to worry about the heavy metals in our real food? Please join me for that next week. I think that's everything. I'm going to go make some dinner now, hopefully with some good ingredients, right? So thanks for listening, friends. Remember, it is easy to forget how blessed we are to live this life. So enjoy the simple, everyday efforts. It's not easy, but it is a good life.